Okay, so today I'm going to be doing a review for a spoiler-free review for The Fires of Vengeance, which is the sequel to Rage of Dragons. I do have a spoiler-free review for Rage of Dragons already up on my channel. It'll be linked in the corner as well as down in the description. Today we're doing spoiler-free for Fires of Vengeance. I got an arc for Fires of Vengeance, which was the coolest thing ever. I did buddy read this arc with Daniel from the channel Daniel Green because he also got an arc. So we read this together and we're going to be posting our reviews on the same day. So I'll have his channel linked in the description. Be sure to also check out his review because his review style is different from mine. His experience with this book, while we both loved it, was different from mine. So you'll just get another perspective on how awesome this book was. And just like book one, I flew through book two. It was such a fast, fun, exciting ride. I think my biggest concern with book two was the fact that Tao in book one is so set on revenge. And by the time I got to the end of book one, I was just thinking, okay, man, come on, let's do something else. Think about something else. Move forward an inch. And I was worried that he would stay here in book two, and he did not. And I'm thrilled about it. So for this review, it will be, as I said, spoiler free, and I will use my normal format, 3 pros, 3 cons, so that you can decide if it's the right book for you. I'm gonna start on a pro, and it's a pro that I've already hit on, and that is the fact that Tao has some very distinct development. We begin the book, I'm gonna keep this spoiler free for book 1 and book 2, just in case, so I'll just say we begin the book with Tao in a completely different place than he was throughout the majority of book 1. However, we still have the same Tao. Really, not much time has passed between the 2 books, and the character is still the same, and I really appreciate that. But very quickly, because everything around Tao has changed, he begins to change too, and we really start seeing him taking some steps into still being the same person, but having an arc. And it was a satisfying while also very, very believable arc that he got in this book. It was a realistic amount of growth, and I really enjoyed reading it every step of the way. My first con is actually going to be something that didn't really bother me as much, but I do want to hit on it because I think that it's important. It was one that Daniel pointed out to me. We do get a fair amount of distance from the antagonist, especially because of how this book is so focused on Tao, and Tao doesn't have a huge amount of experience with the antagonist. It's very similar to how book 1 was. And so you don't really get a lot of stakes into the antagonist's plot or into even really having the same kind of anger toward the antagonist that Tao has. That really doesn't bother me because I tend to care more about the main character and the side characters and the friendships and camaraderie that's happening than I do about the person that is pushing against our main crew. So that really didn't bother me, but it was something that Daniel mentioned. It's probably something that he's going to mention in his review. It's something that I want to make sure that people are aware of in case that would bother them too. My next pro for book 2 is that there was so much more happening in book 2 than there was in book 1, which I think was absolutely necessary. So in The Rage of Dragons, Tao is on a plot for revenge, and everything he does is for the purpose of this revenge plot. It's very fast-paced, but it's also very focused, and book 2 had so much more going on because of Tao's new position. He's now in a very political environment. The world, the scope has gotten much bigger because we're seeing more of what this society is doing and some of the behind the scenes of what the leading people are doing, which is something that we didn't get as much of in book 1. We got some of it, but not as much. As well as Tao and his sword brothers have new tasks to be focused on. So because of that, Tao has a lot more things to be thinking of than revenge, revenge, revenge. He has a lot more going on in his head. He has a lot more things dividing his attention, which then makes which he's still on a plot for his revenge, but that makes that thing a little bit more diluted, which I actually really appreciated. I think 2 stories, 2 books in a row of nonstop, this is what Tao thinks about. 2 books of that in a row it's certainly not what I wanted. And I think that Evan Winters did an amazing job of keeping Tao the same while bringing so many other things in that it made it feel much more balanced, and it's exactly what book 2 needed. My next con is actually probably my biggest con of the entire book, and that is that there were so many things that this book was doing that I think some of it didn't get delivered as well as it could have, as well as it should have. There were some clunky elements in the delivery. Like I said, there was a lot more going on in this book than the other book, and I think that Evan did a great job at balancing most of it, but this time around there was one thing in particular, one arc in particular that I think was relatively important that I really feel like the ball just got dropped on it. It should have been bigger than it was, and instead it kind of just got addressed because we have to address it, then just kind of brush it to the side, and yeah, we'll probably come back to it later. And I appreciate that we're going to come back to it in a later book, but for what it was set up to be, it wasn't executed the way it needed to be done. Now, I'm specifically talking about one thing that was happening in this book. There are a lot of things going on in the book, and I think most of them were handled very well, but there were certain elements that were clunky that didn't get handled as well as they could have. We'll talk about it more in my spoiler-filled review that I'm going to be filming in a few months when the book is out for all of us to read. So I'll go more in depth in that later on, but at the moment there was one thing in particular that I was like, that's it, that's all we're doing here. My next pro is going to be the ending. I was so satisfied with the way this book ended. Not only did it do a lot of things that made the ending really exciting, really thrilling, I could have easily, if I had the ability, if I had the time, I could have easily sat down and read the last 250 pages of this book in one setting, which I don't do ever. I'm a relatively slow reader, so reading 250 pages probably would have taken me 5 hours, honestly. So that's impossible for me with how my life is set up, but I could have had I been able because the ending was so fantastic. It was also just filled with tons of things that I wasn't expecting, and I loved that. I loved being on my toes. I loved constantly saying, oh my goodness, oh my goodness, oh my goodness, around every corner in that last big chunk of the book, and it was fantastic. I also love that we had the climax of the book, and then there was plenty of falling action, which I love. I love books that have a good amount of falling action. I want to see the consequences of what's just happened. I want to see the emotions behind the sacrifices that have been made throughout this entire book, and Evan Winters did a phenomenal, phenomenal job in the falling action of the end of this book. The emotional consequences that came with the decisions that have been made packed exactly the punch they needed to pack for me. I was so thrilled with the way this book resolved with that specifically. I'm supposed to give you one more con, 3 pros, 3 cons. I'm actually not going to give you one last con because I do have a couple more things that I could talk about that this book I wish had handled a little bit differently. I could give you a couple more cons, but I couldn't think of a way to do it spoiler-free. So I'm just gonna save those for when I do my spoiler-filled review when the book is published in November. Editing Murphy here. I thought of one con that I could give you that is spoiler-free, and that is how this book started. The first 7 pages of this book were just a long, drawn-out dump of summary of book 1, and it was done in the most uninteresting way possible. It could have been worked in throughout the story, but instead it was really just a lazy reminding you of what book 1 was in a one-sided dialogue dump. And I really didn't like it, but it's not reflective of the quality of the rest of the book at all. But all in all, Fires of Vengeance has pretty much the same pacing as book 1, maybe just a tiny bit slower, but it'd keep pace with book 1. If you remember, book 1 was very fast-paced, kind of a breakneck, foot on the gas pedal kind of pacing for the majority of the book. And Fires of Vengeance was very similar in that it was such a fast, fun read. I really think Fires of Vengeance took all of book 1's greatest strengths and maintained those, and then the things from book 1 that would have made book 2 weak if it had kept them, it was able to change those things and bring in new things to make this book unique and to make things continue to grow and move forward. And I loved that. I would give this book a 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I'm gonna round it up to a 5-star rating on Goodreads. I enjoyed this probably just as much, maybe just a little bit less than book 1, but right up there with it, almost the same. It was a phenomenal sequel. I enjoyed it so much. And I'm so excited for book 3, and I'm so far away from book 3. We are going to be buddy reading this over on my Patreon in November when it's released, and I do plan to reread it in November to participate in the buddy read fully, and simply because I want to reread it. I had a great time reading it. I'm gonna want to reread it for my spoiler-filled review, and I just want to. I just really enjoyed it, and I'm gonna want to read it again. I will have the pre-order for Fires of Vengeance as well as Rage of Dragons linked down in the description, so be sure to pre-order it if you're interested. Pre-orders help authors out so much. I plan on pre-ordering because I have an arc, but I want to support the author. I definitely recommend it. I think that if you really enjoyed book 1, you will absolutely be satisfied with what book 2 does. I'm really excited to be able to discuss it with you guys when it is released in November. Be sure to chat with me more in the comments about all this, as well as check out Daniel's video, also linked in the description. I post videos every Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. I'll see you guys again soon. Bye.